Well, now let's go back to our top story, and for more on the crisis between Turkey and Russia, let's go live now to Eka Tkeshelashvili, who joins us from Vienna. Now, she was the foreign minister of Georgia in the 2008 when the Russian army invaded the country there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to start by getting your assessment of Russia's policy in Syria after the recent events. Do you think that Moscow is likely to double down in their support of Assad now, or are they likely to actually reassess their strategy, do you think?
I think that Putin had very clear vision when he injected Russia in a much more forceful way in Syria. And then there was a clear strategy behind it, and then nothing has changed with that strategy. So we won't see any fading away presence of Russia in Syria. They will try to make, in my assessment, more visible their presence, so they could double down maybe their action when it comes to how many sites they do bomb, and then what targets they do bomb. And then just to remind the viewers, Russia's strategy when they've started to act militarily in Syria has never been fight against Islamic State, but that it was reinforcement of Assad and reinforcement of Russia's presence in Middle East, and being to become part of the solution on the terms of Russia and Assad rather than on the terms of the coalition that tries to sort out situation in a peaceful way ultimately in Syria.
Well, if Russia isn't prepared to back down in this situation, then how bad do you think relations could get between, Russia and Turkey, for example?
Actually, I think it will be the first time that Russia will be forced to realize that what Russia sees as dependence on Russia, of Europe that be, of Turkey for that matter, is actually an interdependence. And there will be not that much that Russia can actually do that can significantly hurt Turkey in a way that Turkey would undermine its own national interest by succumbing to the Russian pressure. And it will be a very healthy lesson, I would say, for Russia to realize that actually interdependence works in the way that Russia could be forced to reassess how much it can bully around and then force its presence in other neighborhoods and then vis-a-vis the countries that it called partner countries previously. So like Turkey, for example.
Do you think then that any response Russia comes up with to Turkey is going to be purely symbolic?
It will be hurting and biting, but I think it will be steps that Turkey will be able to digest. And I have a full confidence that President Erdogan had very good calculus when the step has been made, and then the political elite of Turkey. And we all have to remember that the shooting down of the airplane hasn't happened out of the blue. From early October, we've seen incursions into the Turkish airspace of Russian planes. We've seen a very forceful diplomatic effort from the side of Turkey and from NATO as well, actually, warning Russia that it was a very unhealthy development and Russia should have been mindful about the actions that it was undertaking in Syria and vis-a-vis the Turkey and its airspace and then sovereignty, sovereign rights of Turkey. And then ultimately, I guess what came as a surprise to Russia was not that Turkey had the right to self-defense, but then that somebody or some country actually, as a sovereign country, was able to deliver on the red lines. Because previously, if we would remember, starting from 2008 in Georgia and then continuing with Ukraine, Russia has emboldened in its understanding that red lines are not actually the real red lines. And then, on this occasion, they actually had to realize that some red lines really do matter, and when it comes to Turkey as a sovereign nation, it takes seriously its national interest, and then primarily, obviously, the fundamental issues when it comes to the inviolability of its borders, and then sovereignty over the territory that is under the sovereign rights of Turkey.
Let's broaden the discussion out, if that's okay, because you mentioned events in Georgia in 2008, you've mentioned Ukraine as well, and now, of course, Syria. Russia's becoming increasingly isolated, it seems, on the global stage. What is the objective here for President Putin, do you believe?
Putin is the person, and then why we speak about the Putin, because it's a very hierarchically driven political regime in Russia. It's obviously not about one person only, but then political elite, let's put it that way, in Russia, has a very clear revisionist mindset and political thinking when it comes to what should be the leverages that Russia should have on a global and regional level, and then how semi-reincarnation of the Soviet Union should be the goal that they might have. And by that, Russia means very concrete deliverables. It's part of the world in the neighborhood of Russia that should be acknowledged, if not officially, but semi-officially, as a field of influence of Russia, where countries falling in that domain lose full sovereignty, but then become countries with restricted sovereignty, and that comes close to decisions that they can make in terms of their foreign policy decisions and freedom of doing that. When it comes to Georgia, that obviously concerns Georgia's choice of being part of EU and part of NATO for that matter. And when it comes to Ukraine, NATO was not in the picture, but then EU was, and even that was sufficient for Russia to backfire on Ukraine and actually start an aggressive war against Ukraine and attempt to dismember the country with the attempted annexation of Crimea. And when it comes to Middle East, that's a remnant of how they see what the role of Soviet Union was in the Middle East, and then how it was perhaps fading away, what was a challenging development in Syria with the developments there, and then injection of Russian military presence in a forceful way with the aim to change the reality on the ground in a way that the rest of the world would accept it as a fait accompli and accept the fact that Russia is a player, it's back on the scene, and then it needs to be part of the solution in the way that was not anticipated even a few months ago, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Eka Tkeshelashvili, former Georgian Foreign Minister, thank you for joining us.